Hello, my name is Richard Goyette, and the topic for this video is the nature of reality. I would like to begin by summarizing what I believe is the fundamental nature of reality based on modern physics. According to Einstein's general theory of relativity, E equals mc squared. Energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. When you reduce matter to its fundamental component, you end up with pure energy, which in a manner of speaking has no substance to it. Substance, or mass, may be converted into pure energy, and vice versa. Just a tiny bit of mass may be converted into a huge amount of energy, which is what happens during an atomic explosion. The same holds true at the subatomic quantum level. It has been demonstrated through actual, indisputable, verifiable, repeatable, and almost universally accepted scientific experimentation that the external physical world we observe is actually immaterial. The smallest individual particles which make up physical objects continually blink into and out of existence. In the exact present moment in time, they exist only in the form of waves of potential energy, described by mathematical wave functions, which do not actually collapse into realities or particles until actually observed by conscious observers. And now some of you have never heard this before, don't have a clue what I'm talking about, so bear with me. And there are plenty of resources that you can use so that you can bone up on this subject later, okay? But just kind of go with me this time. One experiment that demonstrates this truth is the famous double slit experiment relating to Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, which states that you cannot determine the future state of any particle based on its current position and velocity. When you observe or measure the position and or velocity of a wave-like photon of energy, it collapses into a particle. And that particle, believe it or not, can end up virtually anywhere in the universe. You cannot determine in advance where the particle will be the moment after you observe it. Most likely it will end up where you expect, on the detector screen on the other side of the two slits. But in actuality it can end up anywhere in the universe based on a range of probabilities. It has been deduced by many physicists that the universe we observe does not actually exist. Whoa. No two individuals or particles exist at the same moment in time in relation to one another. Everything is relative according to Einstein's theory of relativity. You are separated from everything you physically observe by the amount of time it takes for light to travel from the object you are observing to the retina of your eye, okay? I see you, you see me, but not at the same moment in time. Even two related subatomic particles, such as protons and neutrons in a single atom, do not occupy the same place and time relative to one another. It has been scientifically verified and universally agreed upon that the smallest possible unit of time is approximately 1 times 10 to the minus 24 seconds, which is called 1 Planck unit of time, after the guy that figured all this out. And the smallest unit of distance is approximately 5.3192 times 10 to the minus 44 meters, which we would call 1 Planck unit of distance. Now here's something very surprising. In between those units, nothing exists. When a particle moves the distance of 1 Planck unit of space, it technically disappears and ceases to exist during transit, and comes into existence again on the other side, with no time transpiring during transit. This is why the electrons of an atom move only in clearly defined orbits around the nucleus. When they move from one energy level, which we would call an orbit, to another, they disappear and cease to exist during transit, and then they instantaneously appear at the next energy level, without any time elapsing during transit. This is referred to as a quantum leap. You've heard of a leap of faith, right? Well, this is a quantum leap. What we are viewing when we observe any object, whether in motion or not, are the discontinuous frames of space-time, similar to the frames of a movie, which occur at very small intervals measured in Planck units. In between those frames, things only exist as energy waves of probability and possibility, which do not actually collapse into actual objects or particles until they are observed by a conscious observer. The actual present that I am observing consists of an empty vacuum of nothingness. Only uncollapsed waves of potential energy, described by physicists as quantum wave functions. The energy waves that collapse into particles by our observations exist in the present moment in what physicists call a superposition state, and exist only as possibilities with an infinite number of potential outcomes spread out all over time and space. The actual present moment of the universe, from my unique perspective in space and time, may be best described as a quantum vacuum containing nothing but potential energy. It doesn't exist. Because of the time it takes light to reach the retina of my eyes, everything I am looking at in this current moment is in the past. It does not actually currently exist. Everything in the future does not yet exist. So from my perspective, nothing actually exists except my own consciousness, which is not actually a part of this so-called physical universe. I am a spiritual, non-physical being viewing the world through the eyes, ears, and brain of a quasi-physical body. If you ain't blown away yet, it's because you've already been exposed to this. If you haven't been exposed to this stuff, you're in for the ride of your life. during this video, I'll tell you. So hang on, it gets even better. These discoveries completely changed the way scientists understand the nature of the universe. The old system of Newtonian physics that described all events as deterministic in nature based on strict laws of gravity and motion had to be abandoned in favor of the indeterminism of quantum mechanics. On the macro level, the level of large things, Newtonian physics pretty well describes how the universe works, and the results of our measurements are very predictable. But on the micro or quantum level, the level of very small things, we are not able to make accurate predictions and are only able to describe future events as a range of probabilities, not certainties. When events at the quantum level combine to create large objects and events that we can see and experience with our physical senses, we end up with a world at the macro level that is totally unpredictable. True randomness actually does exist in the universe. We don't live in a natural world subject only to the natural laws of Newtonian physics. We actually live in a supernatural world that is partly described by quantum mechanics and general relativity. We are not physical beings subject to deterministic, immutable laws of cause and effect. We are actually supernatural, spiritual beings. We live in a world that is governed only by probabilities and possibilities. You might ask, if events don't actually happen until after I observe them, what observer or observers are collapsing all the other wave functions of possibility that I don't observe? What about the tree in the forest that falls when no one's looking? Does it really fall? Well, perhaps it does, and perhaps not. I will say this. Human beings are not the only conscious entities in the universe. God is the conscious observer who views everything from every possible time and place. All lesser conscious entities, including the entire human race, are actually all part of a single divine Godhead. God observes and experiences the created universe not just through us, but as us. God may be described as a universal collective consciousness. We are all individual aspects of the consciousness of God. God is everyone and everything that exists. He is omnipresent and omniscient. There is nowhere that God does not exist. It is impossible to be separated from an omnipresent God. One way to illustrate this is to compare the collective consciousness of God with a colony of bees. The individual bees exist as separate conscious beings, but they are invisibly connected to one another, and collectively they operate as a single larger organism. Each separate organism operates with a degree of autonomy, but is also part of a larger organism called a hive or colony, which has a personality of its own that incorporates and combines the personalities of the entire colony. In some ways, it behaves as a single conscious entity. At the same time, the individual bees act as separate entities. And in this illustration, we would be the individual bees, and God would be the hive. Now, I would like to answer a question that relates to the apparent randomness and uncertainty of the positions and velocities of the objects that collapse or materialize as a result of our individual and collective conscious observations. Are the resulting velocities and positions of the particles and objects purely random? Or is there some form of guidance involved? Are all human events the result of blind chance? Or are they somehow being guided by our individual thoughts and purposes in combination with those of the collective consciousness, which is God? In other words, in addition to causing the quantum waves to collapse into actual particles, are we in any way able to at the same time influence the future velocities and positions of those particles? In my view, there are two irrefutable proofs that the results of quantum collapse are not totally random, and the universe that we experience and observe is not the result of blind chance. The first proof is the fact that the creation and continued existence of the universe requires a level of fine-tuning that is mathematically impossible to achieve by merely random processes, and must be the result of some kind of intelligent design. The second proof is the increasing order and complexity that we see in the development of life on Earth, which, according to the second law of thermodynamics, should not be happening. According to this law, which is accepted by the majority of the scientific community, random processes should inevitably result in disorder, but instead we see increasing order and complexity. God, in a manner of speaking, may be described as a universal conscious entity who brought the universe into being and controls its evolution and development by means of nothing more than his thoughts and active observations. Because we are spiritual beings and individual parts of the consciousness of God, in biblical terminology, his children, made out of his own DNA, it is very possible that we have the ability to creatively influence the outcomes of our individual lives by means of that same process, subject perhaps to certain limitations imposed for the good of the entire collective. There is truth to the biblical teaching that with God all things are possible, and that when we draw upon this limitless resource through prayer, we are literally capable of doing all things, and that nothing will be impossible. Because we are spiritual beings created by and connected with God in the way described above, I believe our thoughts, including our attitudes and prayers, can have a dramatic effect not only on future outcomes in our own lives, but also in the lives of others whose lives we touch. I believe that for this to happen, what we are praying for must not be at cross purposes with God's plans for all of us. For example, let's suppose individuals approaching an intersection from two different directions and both are praying for a green light. Both prayers cannot be answered in the affirmative. God has an overriding blueprint which determines the general outline, purpose, and culmination of all future events. He allows us great flexibility with respect to the individual routes we choose to travel, so long as the overall plan is not compromised. See 1 John 5:14-15. And the result is an interesting and sometimes confusing interplay among God's sovereignty, quantum uncertainty, and mankind's freedom of choice. Now I'd like to talk to you about the virtual reality that we call life. But I'm going to do this in another video, in the interest of brevity. Thanks for listening.